Hi everyone, Dr. Klein here again. I'm just stopping in for a few minutes to discuss some of the week 2 readings with you guys. This week you had 2 book chapters from the CART book, and then there were a couple of online readings. One of them was the Federalist Papers number 78, and then you had an article by Levi written in 1965, and then finally for your third and final online reading, you have in comparison, a roughly generously more recent article from Steiker in 2013, and that's the one that talks about sentencing and the court's role in that process. So today I want to talk a little bit about the week's topic, and I always think that when you discuss the court system and SCOTUS really in particular, it's especially an interesting endeavor. Because if you look at SCOTUS, it somewhat still resembles the traditional court system that was established by the Judiciary Act of 1789. But then on the other hand, you have had this almost transformation of sorts, and now it somewhat resembles something that is so totally different from the original intent of the court that you sometimes wonder if it really is the same court system at all. So when we talk about this, we have to take a look back at what the Founding Fathers' original intention for the court was. And the Founding Fathers really took this very strict interpretation approach of the Constitution, and today you still somewhat see that taking place depending on the justice that you're talking about. But some other justices on the current court and in previous courts have decided that they're going to take more of an open-ended approach, and they're going to view the Constitution as this living, breathing document, as you will, and that there is room for evolution and there is room for this sort of growth of the Constitution. So as we discussed in last week's short mini lecture, that the appointment of a new justice to Scalia's vacant seat on the Supreme Court, if you remember, Justice Scalia died in February of 2016. And the appointment to his vacant seat is going to be one of the most important things that we're going to see take place in the next couple of months and really the next couple of years. But in addition to Scalia, there are a few, if you're watching the court, there's a few more justices that are getting up in age, and there are questions as to whether or not some of these justices might retire early or if they might ride it out until they pass away. Because if you remember from the Supreme Court, these are lifetime appointments, right? So the only way that you can get off the Supreme Court is if you retire or if you pass away, or arguably you could be impeached, but it's very rare that that ever happens. So with these justices getting older and with Scalia's vacant seat, you see the potential for a very big change in the court. And Scalia himself was one of these strict traditionalists who really did not deviate much from what he perceived the original intent of the Constitution to be. And others on the court that are in this group that are getting a little bit older tend to take the opposite approach and tend to look at the Constitution as this living, breathing, interpretable document. So with these sort of 2 different approaches to interpretations, as we take those into account, I sort of want to transition into the Levi article and talk about some of the things that were discussed there, because it's a seamless sort of flow. And in the article, Levi makes this fantastic statement and says that the interpreter of the standard then becomes the creator of the standard. And I think this is one of the most important points that is made in the entire article, at least. And it really speaks to the idea that judicial appointments, they're important, because for really at least SCOTUS and in a lot of the federal lower federal courts too, they're for life, right? And in other places they are elected, but at least at the federal system they are lifetime appointments. And for the time that you spend on the bench, and for many justices that's 20, 30 years in some cases, you have the ability to shape and really influence what American life is going to be for decades to come. And that's a lot of importance that's placed on 9 individual people, right? And some argue that we should completely disband the Supreme Court for that exact reason, or we should have elected justices instead of these 9 lifetime appointment people who are there and who might never change their point of view. So really going back to what Levi said, so whatever these 9 people interpret the standard to be, they're going to influence the American standard for quite a long time. And this really rings home when you think about the last year since Justice Scalia has died, and the amount of fights and the amount of filibustering and the amount of shutdowns that the GOP has placed on President Obama as the current sitting president was trying to put through his nominee to the Supreme Court. And if you really look at how much the GOP really stepped in and just sort of almost desperately clung to the idea that the new president-elect would be the person to appoint Supreme Court, the vacancy to the Supreme Court, you know, they really were taking a risk on the fact that it could have gone the other way and they could have had another Democratic president in place. But they really fought as hard as they possibly could to just never confirm President Obama's appointment. And they did so in the hopes that they would get a Republican president and who would then put a more conservative justice on the court, replacing Scalia's already very conservative vote. So they wanted to keep the court having this conservative feel, and they were successful with the election of the new president-elect. But if you really think about the fact that if you keep a conservative court, at least for our perspective in this class and for criminal justice majors as a whole, you know, this is going to have some very large-scale ramifications for crime control, for some of the social movements that have been passed since President Obama has come into office. There might be some sweeping changes, and the new president-elect has sort of declared that he's going to make every effort to make those changes take place. The other issue is that with the GOP holding out on President Obama and allowing the new president-elect to put that vacant seat in place, the new president then has the ability to potentially replace 2 to 3 more justices who, like I said, are getting to retirement age, or they're getting to the point where they might pass away while they are in office. So there's a lot of power there, and it sort of now swings our way into what Hamilton was saying in the Federalist Papers. And I had you read number 78 for a reason. And if you've never seen the Federalist Papers before, they're really interesting reads, and there's a bunch more. I would encourage you to go read as many as you possibly can, because they're just really great pieces. And Hamilton was the majority writer, but there were 2 other men, James Madison and John Jay, who had a hand in writing the remainder of the Federalist Papers. But if you remember from your American history classes that all 3 of those men had a large hand in writing and forming the Constitution, specifically Madison. And what's interesting about these papers is that later on we found out that it was these gentlemen who were writing these papers, but at the time all 3 men were publishing them under the pseudonym of Publius. And they didn't want their names specifically attached to it because the letters are really trying hard, at least in the beginning, and then later on they sort of deviate onto other topics. They try really hard to press upon the general public and state legislatures that we are trying to ratify the state or the United States Constitution, and here are the reasons why you should support us in that endeavor. So really, really good pieces that were being published at the time. But this one in particular, number 78 that I had you read, is really interesting from the perspective that we're trying to look at, because it talks about the formation of the judicial system at the federal level and how Hamilton really doesn't think that it's going to be that worth it in a sense. He believes that the federal judicial system is going to be the weakest link of the other two, or of the total three branches. And it's kind of funny in hindsight, because if you really think about how much power the Supreme Court actually has in comparison to what Hamilton estimated it to have, there's this sort of really big disjuncture, right? So he's thinking that it's going to be this weak thing, and since the creation of the Supreme Court, it really is becoming one of the more powerful branches, because they have the ability to shut down anything that they feel is unconstitutional. So these 9 individuals that we currently have sitting on the court have a lot of power in comparison to what Hamilton originally sort of believed the court was going to be. And this is going to become a lot more apparent to you guys in a week or so when we talk about the Marbury v. Madison case. And that case was actually tried a handful of years after number 78 of the Federalist Papers was written. So I want you to sort of be thinking about this piece and what Hamilton is advocating for a federal court, and how that links itself to the Marbury case and the outcome of what the Supreme Court actually ruled. Because in that case, they actually give themselves much more power than Hamilton ever wanted them to have. So the question becomes, does the court have creative powers? And from Hamilton's perspective, he did not think that they should have them, but what we ended up with was sort of this court system that then had massive amounts of creative powers, and their creative powers then sort of bleed and influence the remaining areas of government and how we create and maintain our laws in this country. So there's a couple other readings this week, and I'm not going to get too much more into it because I want you all to take your active role in the discussion, and there will be a secondary recording that's posted this week from one of your classmates who is doing the very first presentation of the semester. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, kind of like I did last week. That was sort of just a how-to guide to these little lectures. But these are really just meant as a way for me to be able to discuss few key points with you guys, because I don't have you in a classroom, and it sort of just gets you thinking about the different texts in the same sort of pattern that I'm thinking about them. So as you're moving through and you're dissecting them each week for your discussion boards and your short writing assignments, I just wanted to be able to sort of give you a little guide as to where I'm going or where I'm headed with these different readings and my interpretation. So good luck this week on your discussion boards, and good luck this week on your short writing assignment. I really look forward to what you guys are going to present to me, and I will give you some feedback on them just as soon as you get them to me. So I look forward to reading what you guys submitted, and I look forward to talking to you next week again. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, whatever, just want to hash things out and talk to me, I'm always available via email. Come by office hours. We can schedule an appointment if you need. But if not, I guess I will see you guys next week for week 3's mini lecture. Thanks, guys. See you later. Bye.